In this episode of Human Code, I got to sit down with Dan Souza. Dan is the kitchen editor of the New York Times bestseller, The Science of Good Cooking, and James Beard Award-nominated Cook's Science. He is a regular contributor to the Splendid Table radio program, and his personal stories have been featured on the Moth Radio Hour. After graduating from the Culinary Institute of America, Dan cooked in restaurants in Boston, New York, and Hungary before finding his true calling, helping home cooks like me, or sort of like me, when I try to cook, succeed in the kitchen. He is currently editor-in-chief of Cooks Illustrated magazine, a cast member of the Emmy Award-winning television show America's Test Kitchen, and a host of the web series What's Eating Dan, which I love to watch. You can also find him on Instagram and Twitter under @TestCook. So love to hear your points of view after you hear Dan Souza do his thing on our show. Have a listen. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us on this next episode of Human Code. I was so excited that we were going to have a chance to chat with you because I have been watching your videos and really trying to wrap my head around how you do everything you do. And I want you to kind of dive into here you were the celebrity chef, right? In these cosmopolitan locations, working in awesome restaurants. And now you are a food influencer. You're teaching us about cooking and about the artistry and the science behind recipes and cooking and food. And so how did you get here? Like, tell us your story.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I think like teaching is kind of the operative word there is I feel like that's kind of where I've ended up as a teacher, but kind of an interesting path to get there. I've always loved food, which I think is kind of a given for most people. I think everyone kind of loves food. But I never really imagined it as a career for a long time. So I went to the University of Richmond down in Virginia for college and had a great experience and studied like a huge mix of things and changed my major, kind of that situation.
What did you
And I
end up
can't,
studying? What was your focus?
so I studied the Jepson School is like the School of Leadership Studies, which sounds a little funny, but it was a fabulous experience. Like everything from like logic and rhetoric to kind of working in groups, and I don't know, it's just kind of a fascinating, very kind of liberal arts sort of education. And then I did some stuff in the business school as well. So I don't know, I just kind of spread around and wanted to learn a lot. But like some of my favorite classes there were like a photography class I took, and it was very, very kind of mixed educational, which was perfect for me and really what I was interested in. But one of the coolest opportunities that came out of that was actually like 2 weeks before I graduated, I got this email and I didn't have a job lined up. I was like still not really sure what I wanted to do. And it was from a former Richmond grad who had spent the past year teaching English in this rural village in Hungary, about 30 minutes from the Romanian border. And they were recruiting the next teacher to go to this. There's probably about 1,000 people in the village. And I jumped at it and I applied and I got the position. I think maybe I was the only one who applied.
Was that
Like it was
because you were desperate for a job or what? Like what called you?
travel and adventure was I think the biggest thing. I mean, I love English and I love writing and I've always been fascinated with it. So I thought I'd be good at that, which turned out to not really be the case. Teaching English was a lot harder than I imagined. But I wanted to see that part of the world and get out there. And so while I was there teaching, one of my adult students was the chef at the local restaurant, and he would like prepare the school lunches, but then also do these huge wedding parties on the weekends and stuff. And so he would, like the father of the bride, like earlier in the week would drop off half a steer and he would break it down and make like the most scratch cooking possible, right? From just like, you know, all whole foods and just really incredible Hungarian cooking. And I just fell for it. Like I was like, the process and the transformation was so interesting to me. And the idea that you could really like focus your life on this, I thought was so cool. So when I came back to the States after about a year there, I worked in advertising for a little bit because that was sort of in line with what I had studied. And
Oh, that's what
I
I did
like,
too.
you did too? Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, as you know, it's a cool industry. Like
Right.
you get to work on a lot of different things. And I traveled, it was really fun, but I always had in the back of my mind, I was like, I'm not working with food. I'm not working with food. And so I eventually allowed myself to basically quit that job and go work in some restaurants in Boston.
But that's
And
super hard. I mean, you hadn't
yeah,
gone to culinary school. Like, how did
right.
you get a job in these in Boston? You know, they have a good chef scene or what a good restaurant scene. Like, what did you charm them with your language skills, your advertising skills?
Well, I'm really lucky. Chef Dante DeMagistris had a restaurant really close to where the ad agency was, and we'd go in there all the time and hang out and stuff. And one time I was just like, could I just come in on like Sundays or the weekends and like work, And he was really generous and just kind of opened the door for me. And that really gave me the start where he's like, gonna trust me with, working with a few people, super green, didn't really know anything. And I found that throughout my time in the industry is like there's such generous people. People who want to feed you and cook for you are like good people to hang out with.
Because well, I don't know. I get this impression from the movies and from the shows. It's so cutthroat, and it's you're lucky to survive as a chef. Like it sounds like you had a different type of experience. Why?
Well, so it's interesting because like it's that too. Like it's an incredibly grueling, a hard world, but a lot of that is like driven by the fact that you have to prove yourself every single night. It's not like other jobs. It's not like you have a bad day, like all right, we'll make it up tomorrow kind of thing. It's like every single night matters. So it's a high pressure. Margins are razor thin. It's very very challenging. So all of that is there. But I think things have changed for the better in a lot of ways in terms of better culture in kitchens. But at the heart, I've run into so many people that are kind and generous, and they got into food because they wanted to feed people, and they really, they love the act of cooking and doing that. But so from there, I did go to culinary school. I went to the CIA, which is the Culinary Institute of America, and that's north of Manhattan. And I did that for a couple years, which I love. Like I'm a big school guy. I don't think you need to go to culinary school to go into this world, but for me, it was the path I really, really loved. And then I worked in restaurants a little bit more, and then eventually found my way to America's Test Kitchen, which is where I currently work. And specifically, I wanted to come here for the magazine Cooks Illustrated, which is the magazine that I now run. Which, if you had told me, as a kid reading like copies at my house that my mom got, like I never would have believed you. It's really, it's a very fun, fulfilling job to be able to work on a brand that that I've loved for a really long time and kind of take it in this next direction. But kind of full circle to your intro around just like teaching is what I realize is like I mean I love cooking, and cooking in restaurants gets you really fast, and you built a lot of skill. But what I think I love the most is just educating people about cooking in whatever media, whatever medium it takes to do it. But seeing people grow, and specifically home cooks, because I feel like I don't know, that's where I fell in love with food is my mom's cooking and getting people in the kitchen.
But
Um,
it's not
yeah.
just that you're teaching a recipe. It's not like you're the typical Food Network that I watch.
Mhm.
But you're going levels deeper, and you're revealing insight about food and about the chemistry of food. Like, how did you get into that aspect of the cooking, and why
Yeah.
you felt like you needed to teach that?
Well, for me, I don't know if you're this way. I have this like hunch that you probably are too, but like, so I have a kind of an analytical approach to life in general, but also like I have a really hard time doing anything if I don't understand why I'm doing it. Like I can do it once, but I probably won't repeat it the right way, or I don't know what to do when I start to mess something up. And so for me, the why of cooking became so important for my own education that if I didn't understand, why I was, frying this egg on medium high heat, and why I was covering it at one point, or not, like it just didn't click with me. And so searching for the why really leads you to science, especially in cooking, largely chemistry, but it expands beyond that. And so that I've always loved science, but food was the connector for me where I was like, oh, this is incredibly practical and hands-on. And I don't look at food science as like, big confusing words and hard to read labels and, what's happening in a lab or something. It's like, it's hands-on practical stuff that is at the end of the day more valuable, as you're saying, than a recipe. If you understand what's going on when you cook eggs, it opens up the world of everything you would do with it, from poached to hard boiled.
My mother was a chemistry professor for the
Oh,
longest time
cool.
and a very good cook. No surprise, because she
Yeah.
too saw the relationship. I, however, am not a very good cook, nor am I an expert in chemistry, but I can appreciate it, and I certainly, to your point, appreciate your point about seeking the why and how and by the way, it connects very well to your leadership skills, I'm sure too, right? In all your leadership training, because one of the things we always learn is how important it is to not justify, but give the why behind any change or any type of direction that you're taking the team into. So I do see that.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't have a kinship to the chemistry side, or the cooking. I do have a kinship around the why. So you're able to decode the the why behind the cooking and the food and how it all works together. What what is it about the technology aspects of cooking that you find exciting, or that have changed the way you actually approach food and cooking?
Mm. Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Technology is so big when you talk about food. It can take so many different forms, and you know, we can dig into cool pieces of tech that people have developed, that have had an impact on cooking, more recently in terms of like sous vide cooking, and which had its start in the 70s, but over the past decade has really gotten so much more into like home kitchens and stuff. But when I really think about tech, like, and having a big impact on cooking and cooking culture and stuff, for me, it actually is much more in terms of social media, which might sound strange. I mean, social media obviously has a huge impact on everything that we do, but from my perspective, in terms of like home cooking, which is what we focus on so much, and helping kind of home cooks be really successful, it's about kind of being exactly where they are with the form that they need, and so for someone like me, like coming up, like watching Food Network, but like Jamie Oliver and Julia Child, Alton Brown and Good Eats, like those were long form shows that I learned a ton from, and then favorite cookbooks that I grabbed. And so, but for like, someone who's just getting into cooking, someone, maybe Gen Z who has kind of, moved out of the house and is wanting to get into stuff, short form social video is so powerful. It it's amazing how much you can get across in something that's, seems so short, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, that I think it's had this incredible kind of leveling up effect across the board. If you're a food enthusiast or cooking enthusiast, you can acquire so much information from that stuff so quickly that, if I talk about like brining chicken or something like that, and someone's a food enthusiast, they can probably tell me pretty much exactly what's going on with brining, why you want to do it, and what cuts it would be good for. And that's the kind of stuff that you'd have to really dig more to understand and get back in the day. Like in culinary school, the why wasn't even there when I was going. You had to really like dig for it. And now it just kind of levels everybody up in a pretty, I think, impactful way.
Yeah. It's funny. I thought you were going to go to like something around the convection oven or the
Hmm.
microwave, or a thermometers or whatever. But the fact that you actually focused on the media is very interesting. And I'm watching the Julia, I forget what it's
Oh
called,
yeah.
the one on HBO, and it's so awesome. But it's so fascinating how, yes, it was her TV show that brought French cooking to America. That was her ambition, and it was only through the medium of TV, that was also a fairly new phenomenon. It was early 60s, right? That democratized food and cooking. And I remember, speaking of college, I took a course by a visiting professor, so I was super lucky. And it was all about television and the impact of
Mm.
television, particularly on the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. Because before, pre television, how people would conceive a war, or how they would conceive a you know a challenge amongst society would be, you'd be limited, right? Because all you would get is the story on in the paper, a moment in time, maybe you'd hear something on the radio. And then what TV did was totally reveal the
Mm.
horror of wartime, and and just the total inequity of folks during the civil rights movement, and it changed everything, right? And so
Yeah.
back to the power of just the visual medium and the moving, the sight, sound, and motion medium for changing people, dramatically changing people and changing a society. You see it in so many different ways. And in this case, it's around cooking and food. And at the end of the day, what do we consume every single day? Multiple times a day is food. And if
Yes.
we don't understand it, then we're not understanding a fundamental aspect of our lives, right? So I hear you, and I appreciate your that you pointed to the visual medium of social media, or even video.
Well, I think that's like all such good points, and like that TV was groundbreaking, right, in its ability to reach, and then how many multiple times that is what social media is for people, right, in terms of that like immediate access. And I think for a lot of more traditional, so we're a very traditional publisher, right? Like I work on a print magazine, but we also have a massive social media program through Cooks Illustrated, America's Test Kitchen, and all of our brands. Is probably like 4 million followers on Instagram alone. And I think for a lot of brands out there, like some think of it as like the chopping up and the not as good a version, but I don't feel like it's that at all. I actually feel like it's like this distillation, and as an editor, more concise, edit, lose words to get that point across. And so, for instance, like the time that we spend in the kitchen here on recipes is, I mean, it's kind of notorious in the industry. We spend about like 6 weeks on one single recipe. So we have a really talented test cook in the kitchen with years of experience, testing a recipe 40, 50, 60 times with a group of people tasting. And so we get to a recipe that we feel like is really, really amazing. We have a test panel of home cooks, probably 40,000 people that volunteer to make the recipes before we publish them. So we have this incredible, like labor intensive process, right? And we write a big story about it, and we have it on our TV shows, all this stuff. But we'll also, when we get to the point where we're making social video on it, we will distill all of that knowledge down into something that is a minute, that you can consume in a minute. And it's like, it's just this incredible thing to me, and you can take that and run with it. I did this recent series on Cooks Illustrated Instagram Reels, and it's also on our TikTok channel, but I really just wanted like these science, like big hits of science in small amounts. And so people talk about gluten a lot, right? In terms of, oh, it's bad, or I can't have it, and all this kind of stuff. And I wanted to show what gluten actually is. And so I made a bread dough and I washed it to get all the starch off, and you get this lump of gluten that's left over. And seitan is a food that people eat too. But then I pop it in the microwave and it blows up into this loaf of bread that is only gluten. Like it is a 100% gluten loaf of bread as opposed to like gluten free. And that has like 4 million views, and people are like, oh, like this is that thing, right? Like it's talked about in all this way. And in, a minute, you are like, you snap in and you have this image in your head and carry it with you. So I don't know, if you do that over and over again, I don't know, you can just learn so much from it. And I think that learning and education is the thing that gets people interested in cooking, interested in being in the kitchen, which ultimately is our big
But
goal,
in
is get
bite-sized
people in there.
forms, because I
Yeah.
notice that every video I watch, you rarely go over 10 minutes.
For my YouTube, yes.
Yes,
Yeah. Those are
on
exactly.
YouTube.
Yeah.
And you speak
Yep.
quickly, but you also pack a
Yeah.
lot, but you pack a lot in there. And
Yep.
is that purposeful, that you realize that, I mean, no pun intended, bite size, but that we're talking about food, but that people can, that's the best amount of information that you can throw at somebody, is like that 10-minute version.
Yeah. I think again, it depends on like where you are. So like our flagship shows that are on PBS, and you can watch them on like Pluto and stuff like that. Those are, a 30-minute show, and that feels right for that. And we do a lot of demonstration. And then I think for YouTube, some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, but it's like what that audience kind of wants, I think, and needs. And I love that kind of quick hit of information. People are busy, but I like getting that quick hits with like some humor sliced and diced in there. So that my goal is like in 10 minutes, I really cover a lot of ingredients. It's like you'll never think of that ingredient the same way again,
So true.
right?
So
From
true.
start to end.
I was watching the shrimp one and how you were talking, and there was, and you did it in like 10 minutes, but there was a lot of really interesting information on there. So speaking of recipes, you have very interesting approaches to your content, like the dangerous science of perfect pretzels. Like, how do you decide on these topics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're very in tune with our audiences across the board. And so we talk to our audiences a lot, whether it's, in social media or for the print magazine, like actually surveying, subscribers and readers and asking what they want. So that informs it to some degree. People are asking for more recipes using an Instapot. Like, okay, we're going to like listen to that and kind of and give people what they want. But there's also stuff that we just get excited about and we love, and something like that pretzel video that you're talking about, that was really like true German pretzels that are dipped in lye, which is this incredibly caustic substance, and then baked. And it's a, it's an ancient,
People actually
recipe.
make that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, but that lye dip like changes the entire, it gives you pretzel flavor. The science is fascinating behind it. And we wanted to set out a way to like, the title is a little cheeky that it's like live dangerously kind of, but we have a really safe method of doing it. And we think that it's worth doing, and even if you don't want to make it, it's really interesting to watch. You learn something. The next time you try a German pretzel at a restaurant or wherever, you're going to appreciate the taste difference and the shininess and how that all came to be. So that could be an inch forward for you to maybe making it one day, or just being more interested in your food and kind of where it comes from.
Right. So it's not just, okay, I understand why, so I can cook differently, but it's also, I understand why, so I can eat differently and appreciate differently.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's funny, like I think about like the American home, or the common home, and like the different rooms you have in there, and like the kitchen is the one room where like most people in their life will actually like go and make something. I mean, you have people who have workshops and artists who do lots of things, but your average person, like the only place you're making anything is in the kitchen, and that process, like we just feel here, I feel in general, is like it leads to a happier life. You feel more accomplished. You feel really good. And so, whatever it takes to kind of get someone over that threshold, cooking is time consuming. It can be hard. It doesn't always have to be, but like there's some barriers to entry, and also just not knowing enough to get in there. So yeah. So if you watch a fun video about, how live dip pretzels are made, and it just makes you more curious about food, maybe the next time you're at the supermarket, you'll be inclined to buy something or try a recipe that you haven't tried before, and step into that kind of workshop that's in your house.
Right, right. Um, so you've obviously created many different types of shows and content. Can you pick your top two or three recipes that you've created content around? And it may not be because you love the food the most, but you had the most fun doing them. Like
Mm,
two or three that really stick in your head, and why?
that's a really great question. Yeah, so many. It's like picking your favorite child or
I
something,
know,
or your
right?
favorite pet. One recipe that was, so when I first started here, I was a test cook on Cooks Illustrated, which was kind of like my dream, to develop recipes and spend that 6 weeks on a recipe. And one that I worked on, that I didn't think I cared about at all going into it, and ended up really loving it, was a recipe for butterscotch pudding.
Ooh, yum.
Yeah, and so it wasn't something I grew up with, and someone who had worked on the recipe, that process I talk about, sending it out to like people to make it home before we publish it. We have really strict guidelines there, and if people don't like it or the recipe doesn't work for them, we won't publish the recipe. So I kind of inherited this half finished recipe for butterscotch pudding from someone else. It was my goal to like get it up to par and stuff. And so I dove into it, and it's like loaded with interesting science, but it's all about developing this like insanely rich caramel, butterscotchy, salty, just delicious flavor, and getting the right texture. And so over the course of that time, I just fell in love with it. And I made it for a friend's Thanksgiving recently. Like, yeah, I make it all the time. It's really, really good. And I find those are really fun when you're just like, you didn't think you liked it and you end up kind of falling for it. Another one was, potato gnocchi, where I've tried my hand at it a lot of times, and like it's either like kind of mashed potato-y or they're too chewy. Like there's all these like really challenging things. And so I love recipes like that where there's like a couple ingredients, but it's all about ratios and technique and you really dive in on it. And I came up with one of the biggest issues with that is most recipes, they start with an amount of potatoes. And then once you're done like cooking them and, ricing them and stuff like that, you end up with like different amounts and that affects how much flour you add. And so you end up with this problem. So it's literally just measuring out that amount of potato and it solves kind of all of the problems. So anyone can just start it from the first time and be like, make excellent potato gnocchi out of it. And that was a fun one to just really drill down on and get
So
kind of
it
nerdy
sounds
about.
like you like to have a challenge that you have overcome. So whether it's a
Yes.
challenge because you didn't think you would like the recipe, or it's a challenge because you've tried it many times and you haven't nailed it, and then once you nail it, you feel this sense of accomplishment. So you're still a student, and I think going back to the beginning of our conversation when you talked about school and this multidisciplinary education you had, and you weren't necessarily leaning into one particular direction or career choice or whatever, but you just like to learn and you like to teach, and it's just so evident in what you're doing right now, right? Both you're constantly learning and you're constantly helping everyone else learn. And I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, wow, you summed that up so perfectly, and I hadn't really like made that connection. But yeah, it's true, and my whole team is working on new stuff all the time, and so I'm constantly learning from them. Like they're like, "Try this. This is interesting," and I agree. I think that is what's kept me so fascinated by this and in this industry, but then also in this role for a while now. You're good.
Okay, one last question. What are you making? Like, what's the big recipe you're going to try out in this holiday season for people?
That's a great question. So we passed Thanksgiving, which was fabulous. Like we prep in the food industry for Thanksgiving starting in the summer, so
I'm
it's like
sure.
yeah, like kind of goes and goes and goes. But so we had like fabulous turkey recipes and stuff like that. But I'm looking forward to switching over and like for the holiday season. I've got this prime rib recipe that I really love. That it's it kind of guarantees that like perfect medium rare from edge to edge. You start by like searing it, and then you go a really low oven for a long time, and it's just the best. The house smells great for a really long time while you're making it, and then it's always a crowd pleaser on the table. So I think that's going to be a fun one to play around with this holiday season.
I lied. I do have actually one more question.
Yeah.
What are you making tonight for dinner?
What am I making tonight for dinner? Not prime rib, I'll tell you that. That's a special occasion. Um, so I'm like a huge I'm on like a really big like legume and bean kick.
Good, because I'm a vegetarian, so maybe
Oh,
I'll.
you are you?
Yeah.
So tonight I'm making a soup that I've made a few times before. So it's lentils, like the green French pooey lentils that hold together really well. So it's those canned chickpeas, which are fabulous. Like the canned chickpeas are just as good as cooked from dried. A little bit of basmati rice that I've cooked, and the broth though is the liquid that I cook the lentils in. And this is, I think, one of like the tricks to really great soups with those things is don't drain off when you're cooking lentils, don't drain it off. Save that liquid. It is like
So
has
that
tons of body.
graininess, that kind of grainy liquid.
So if you're cooking like the French ones, the French lentils, they don't give off like they're going to stay intact. They're not going to make it grainy. So you have this broth that has like lots of body and lots of richness. Um, and then I make this sort of pesto pistou sort of mixture, which is like pounded pistachios, parsley, raw garlic, preserved lemons or lemon juice. And what you do is, I love doing this kind of thing where like the soup is savory but simple, so you have like the chickpeas and the lentils and the rice, and it's just salty and good. And then you do a spoon of this on top and let it sort of disperse in. And so you get some spoons that have more of it, but it just like blooms in that hot liquid. And it's much more than like the sum of its parts. It's one of those things. And it's cold out here in Boston, so it's like the perfect, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'm from Boston, so I can totally imagine how cold it
So
is.
yeah,
I know what it's
it's
like. Yeah.
pitch black outside and,
Right.
30 degrees. Yeah.
You want a soup. You want a soup. So
Yeah.
I promise to not keep you too long. And I would spend hours with you. So I may have
Oh,
to
me
drag
too.
you back on the show. But thank you so much for giving us your time and your insight and kind of decoding for us how you do what you do, and giving us a greater appreciation for food and cooking and everything that surrounds it. So thank you so much, Dan.
Oh, well, thank you, Abigail. This is such a pleasure, and I'm happy to come back anytime. We can chat food whenever you want.
Yeah, you can tell us how your soup mixture went.
I will.
Okay.